extend that regard to animals, whether they be companion animals, farm animals, or wild animals. And I reaffirm the principles on which this government's policies on animal welfare are based. Our recognition that animals are sentient beings, contrary to the fake news spread recently by certain media outlets. That is certainly true of this government, and indeed of predecessor governments. And in fact, Mr. Robertson, it was this Parliament back in 1822 which was the first ever legislature to implement laws to protect animals, with the Act to prevent the cruel and improper treatment of cattle. The government believes that the direct effect of the principle of sentience is recognised throughout the statute book, but for the avoidance of any doubt, I'm sure that honourable members will join me in celebrating this morning's announcement by my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, of a new bill that will both increase the maximum penalties for animal cruelty from 6 months imprisonment to 5 years, and will also enshrine animal sentience into law. This draft bill will embed the principle that animals are sentient beings, capable of feeling and pain and pleasure, more clearly than ever before in domestic law. There was never any doubt or any question that our policies on animal welfare are driven by the fact that animals are sentient beings. The government is committed to raising animal welfare standards and to ensuring that animals will not lose any recognitions or protections once they leave the EU. The draft bill will make our recognition of animal sentience clear. It contains an obligation directed towards government to pay regard to the welfare needs of animals when formulating and implementing government policy. This provision does not apply to ministers in the devolved governments of Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, but we will work closely with the devolved administrations on this important matter. Mr. Robertson, this will build on the long list of legislation that Parliament has passed to protect animals, as the first significant general legislation was the Protection of Animals Act 1911, which introduced the offence of causing unnecessary suffering to an animal. The 1911 Act stood the test of time and was used every year by the RSPCA to successfully prosecute around 1,000 people a year for animal cruelty. It was eventually replaced in 2006 by the Animal Welfare Act, which introduced the added offence of failing to provide for the welfare needs of an animal, an offence which had been present on farm legislation, but its inclusion in the 2006 Act meant it applied to all kept animals. Now, Mr. Robertson, I could read out a very long list of Acts of Parliament, but it would take too long to do so. But it is an indication of how much animal welfare means to this Parliament and to the public. But in particular, I'll mention one or two. The Performing Animals Regulation Act regulates circuses and other acts involving animals. It's still in force today, but the government is in the process of replacing it. The Cockfighting Act, which as the name suggests, made it an offence to organise a cockfight. The Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981, which stepped up provision for wildlife, including banning methods of killing certain animals, for example wild birds, so as to avoid bodily injury in a particular way. And then the Zoo Licensing Act, which imposed strict welfare and conservation standards on our zoos. We've also introduced regulations through EU law, which we will bring into UK law, any that aren't already in place, through powers granted by the EU Withdrawal Bill. Those will include the welfare of farmed animals regulations, which implemented EU legislation on minimum standards of welfare for different species of farmed animals, and the Welfare of Animals Transport Order 2006, which again implemented EU legislation on the welfare standards for animals in transit. As I indicated, Mr. Robertson, the government intends to go further on improving the welfare of all animals, be they wild, companion or farm. The UK has been at the forefront of driving global efforts too to safeguard the world's most vulnerable species, and we absolutely remain committed to protecting global wildlife for generations to come. As my honourable friend pointed out, that's why we're taking action to preserve elephants, and we're now consulting on a proposed ban of the sale of ivory in the UK that contribute directly or indirectly to the poaching of elephants. The proposals on which we consult are designed to put the UK front and centre of global efforts to end the insidious trade in elephant ivory. Historically, the United Kingdom has been ahead of international trends on trap humaneness, outlawing leg-hold traps and establishing an approval system for spring traps in the 1950s. We propose to consult next month on UK-wide implementation of the Agreement on International Humane Trapping Standards. This agreement that exists between the EU, Canada and the Russian Federation puts in place humaneness standards to improve the welfare of wild animals commonly caught in traps for their pelts. And now, under that agreement, we are required to prohibit traps and trapping methods which do not meet the standards for listed species. 5 of those are currently present in the wild in the UK: stowed badger, pine otter and European beaver. I know that my honourable friend takes a great interest in them too. But once the UK legislation comes into force, only traps and trapping methods which meet the standards for species covered by the agreement will be permitted under licence. I'm afraid I cannot give away at the moment. If I have time at the end, I will turn to him. We will also be tightening the rules regarding dog breeding, pet shops, animal boarding, performing animals and riding stables. Irresponsible dog breeders and dealers are a stain on our national conscience, and such stopped. We will be introducing new regulations on the welfare of dogs in dog breeding establishments. We will ensure more breeders need to be licensed. Statutory minimum welfare standards will be applied to licensed breeders, which will be enforced by local authority inspectors. Detailed guidance will be provided to inspectors to assist them with the new regulations. And all pet vendors will also have to provide information to new owners that educates them about their new pet. It will be made clear that any business selling pet animals online will also need to be licensed. And we continue to work closely with the Pet Advertising Advisory Group on minimum standards for such sellers. And we're enormously grateful for the input from local authorities and other organisations to draft the new regulations. I hope they'll be in place by the end of next year. As my old friend highlighted in terms of farm animals, to improve welfare animals slaughter and to deliver our manifesto commitment, we recently carried out a public consultation on our proposals to require CCTV in every slaughterhouse in England. The consultation closed in September. There was strong support from nearly 4,000 responses. More than 99% were in favour of this. It's an overwhelming endorsement policy. We published the government's response to the consultation last month, and will follow up by laying secondary legislation before Parliament early in 2018. Now, my honourable friend has particularly raised the issue of live export of animals, and I know that's a significant issue of significant concern to honourable members. Now, compared to 20 years ago, there has been a dramatic fall in the trade in live animals going direct for slaughter. From nearly 2 million animals that were exported every year, in 2016 there were 15,000 sheep exported, with 5,000 directly for slaughter from GB. Sheep are the main livestock species exported for these purposes, and I know that this issue still causes considerable concern. And my honourable friend will be aware of the restrictions that we have at the moment within the EU. But we've always been clear that the government would prefer to see animals slaughtered as near as possible to their point of production, and we believe that a trade in meat is preferable to a trade based on the transport of live animals, particularly where journeys may result in livestock travelling long distances across Europe. As we move towards a new relationship with the EU and the rest of the world, we have a unique opportunity to shape future animal welfare policy to ensure that there are higher standards in every area. And the commitments in our manifesto made it clear that we would take early steps to control the export of live farm animals for slaughter once we leave the EU. We are currently considering options, but I can say it is a rather complex issue, and of course any future proposals would have to consider the trade between the UK and Ireland, whether that's with Northern Ireland or indeed across the Republic of Ireland. On farm codes, in addition to laying new statutory welfare codes for cats, dogs and horses before Parliament shortly, we're also raising standards on farms by modernising the Farm Animal Code, a move which has been welcomed by industry. A new code for meat chickens will be laid before Parliament shortly, and we'll be consulting on new codes for laying hens and pigs in the new year. The updated codes of practice for England will provide clear guidance again to producers on how to comply, and we continue to work closely with DEFRA's delivery bodies, including the Animal and Plant Health Agency, on enforcement of welfare standards. As I say, my honourable friend raised a wide variety of issues there. In terms of antibiotics, governments and the farm sectors, such as the meat and chicken industry, have taken significant strides in reducing the amount of antibiotics used, and I recognise that may not still be enough for my honourable friend. He also mentioned elements about trophy hunting. I think it would be worthwhile for my honourable friend to read the report published by Professor MacDonald that was actually commissioned by DEFRA on this matter about the balance of conservation and the hunting for commercial purposes in that way. I think that the restriction he referred to, which President Trump was considering removing, has put a pause to that, was specifically from Zimbabwe. I believe that the US does allow other elements still to be imported, but it's done with a conservation basis. Now, the measures I've set out today clearly demonstrate the government's intention to avoid animal suffering and show we are taking steps to strengthen standards. As I say, in the future, we intend, once we're outside the EU, to take full account of the scope for the UK to set the very highest standards in welfare, and to do that to encourage action on a global level. I'm conscious that I've got 30 seconds left, so I'll take a very brief intervention from my honourable friend.
Wild animals. Does my honourable friend welcome the plans approved by this government to release beavers into the Forest of Dean for the first time in 400 years? Does she agree this should be the beginning of a longer process of reintroducing, where practical, species previously wiped out by human activity?
Well, I would say that beavers haven't really been present for 400 years on this island. He'll be aware of the releases that have happened in Scotland. I'm aware of the trial on the otter, and there is further trials to come. I think it matters that we approach this on the basis of science and rigour, and that's what this government will do.
The question is if this House has considered government policy on animal welfare. Does many of that say aye? The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Order, the sitting is suspended until 2:30 p.m.